Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Tuesdays at 6 from the Cathedral of St. John the Divine here in New York City. Today, the 13th of October, is the date of the premiere of my new transcription for the organ of Ralph Vaughan Williams' Fifth Symphony. And this concert is going to start in exactly 60 minutes' time on the Cathedral website, and it's very, very easy to buy your digital ticket. Just go on the website and follow the instructions. It's just 2 or 3 clicks. For just $10 you can listen to the whole concert, and it'll be up on the site for 48 hours. So for this program, starting right now at 6 o'clock, Tuesdays at 6, we thought today it would be appropriate to have a little bit of an interview and a bit of an introduction to the whole concept of organ transcriptions, and particularly with the music of Ralph Vaughan Williams. And it's my very great pleasure to introduce my friend, the Director of Cathedral Music at St. John the Divine, my very good friend and colleague Kent Treitel, and he'll be joining us in just a few minutes. To start with though, here is just a little taster to whet your appetite. Most incredible overture by Ralph Vaughan Williams called The Wasps.
I'm Kent Treitel, the music director here at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and I'm happy to be talking with David Briggs, artist in residence.
Hello over there, 12 feet away.
Yes, we are. We're keeping our distance. Even though we're so close, I can never forget our work on Mahler 2 together.
Mm-hmm.
David, would you talk about your Mahler cycle?
Yeah, well, I've really loved Mahler symphonies since I was a teenager, and I first got to know them as a viola player in the orchestra, and my first kind of baptism of fire was with Mahler 5 in about 1979 in the Royal Albert Hall with Sir Charles Groves. And things about Mahler's music, once it gets into your veins, it's very hard to shift. So over the last couple of decades, I suppose, I've transcribed, as well as number 5, number 6, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 8, and 3 of the song cycles. So I just love the music and want to play it on my own instrument. That's really the main reason.
Well, it's so fantastic, the transcriptions that you've done and the work we've done together on Mahler 2 and Mahler 8 has
Absolutely.
been just,
First time was,
light.
I think, was it 2012 we combined using the wonderful Skinner organ up in the Great Choir, and with a huge chorus. And
That's right, it was the Manhattan School of Music Symphonic Chorus.
yeah,
And then we had the idea to do Mahler 8,
we did.
which was unbelievable. That was a combined Manhattan School of Music choruses, symphonic chorus, chamber choir, Oratorio Society of New York, and the choristers from the cathedral.
Yep, and about 8 soloists.
That's right.
I think.
8 soloists.
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible
Yeah.
moment. when we did that. Having done all of that with Mahler, what do you find to be the big difference between, or similarities between Mahler and Vaughan Williams?
Gosh, well, I suppose, Vaughan Williams was later. He didn't die until 1958. Mahler died when the cathedral was opened in that year, 1911. And it's very intriguing to me that although they're both, of course, quintessential romantic composers, they're very different. And actually, I learnt the other day, reading a very, very interesting book about Vaughan Williams, that he hated Mahler. He really did not like Mahler's music at all. I think he found it too schizophrenic and too moody and too out there on the sort of psychological scale, which is not to say that there isn't some element, for instance, in the Fifth Symphony of Vaughan Williams, that some of it is very intense, and the scherzo, for instance, is really, I think, incredibly sardonic, and it's kind of dark humor. But it's not quite on the scale of Mahler, with that kind of intensity of almost schizophrenic action. But I do think with Vaughan Williams, he was an interesting personality. He had this kind of image, this persona of being, he was 6'2", and he wore this, always wearing a suit which didn't quite fit. He was a little bit kind of haphazard, accident prone, a little bit what you call eccentric. But he was clearly an absolute genius, Vaughan Williams. He knew everything about Shakespeare, for instance. He was very, very literary, and he died. I think in 1958 he was reading, a novel like Jane Austen or something like that. Very, very cultured sort of person, and of course he was from Britain, and he's perhaps, along with Elgar, the quintessential sound of England. And you really hear it, I think, in, of course, the Lark Ascending. It's just conjures up this kind of lush, green, rolling, having a pint, a nice warm pint, as opposed to the cold beer that we get in the US. A nice warm pint in a pint jug with a coal fire, and the golden retriever lying in front of it, and then he would click his fingers and the golden retriever would stand up, turn through 180 degrees and sit down again, and then RVW would light his pipe, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So it was it's a very English existence. And I think it sounds very English, this music.
This is not your first foray into a Vaughan Williams project.
No.
Tell us.
Well, I think it was probably 5 years ago that John Francis, my friend who's the secretary of the Vaughan Williams Society in London, he invited me to record the complete organ works of RVW, because Vaughan Williams was, I think, a very good organist, actually. Even though he took his FRCO in 1898, but I heard on the grapevine there is some conjecture that he actually paid one of his mates to take it in his place, because all the examiners are behind a big curtain.
Screened, exactly.
So who knows? We'll probably never know the answer to that. But he was clearly a very good organist, and there's quite a bit of organ music. The truth of the matter is that it's a little bit variable. Some of it is. I think he probably wrote before cornflakes at breakfast and maybe after one or two whiskies too many the night before. I don't know. But some of the best music is wonderful. And there's an amazing piece called the Prelude and Fugue in C minor, which was dedicated to Henry Lee, who was kind of the Horowitz of the organ in England in the 1920s and 30s. And it's a really good piece. And nobody plays it because it's too difficult.
Aha.
I bet RVW could not play it.
Interesting. And interesting that he was so facile on the organ, and yet we think that he was not a person of faith necessarily.
I think he was a bit like Mahler. He was always the big question mark. And it always intrigues me how somebody who as you say, not necessarily a person of faith, although I think he believed in a bigger picture. But how somebody who is not a practicing Christian can write the G minor Mass? That, I think, is really an extraordinary thing.
I agree. I mean, every time I do the G minor Mass, I think to myself, how could it be possible that he might not have some kind of sense of the great beyond?
Yeah.
And also, back on what we were talking about earlier, I'm always amazed at how he can conjure the antique, the early music. He can conjure the early and then have the greatest romantic strokes.
Absolutely.
That are just amazing. And he brought them right into mid-century.
The interesting thing is that he was always asking other musicians for advice. He had a little bit of a low self-esteem, it seems.
Interesting.
He was always asking for advice on orchestration, people like Gordon Jacob and things like this. But Gordon Jacob apparently just sent it back and said, Rafe, it's perfect. Because, I mean, clearly he had an amazing ear, an amazing gift for sonorities. I mean, you look at the huge variety of his orchestral output, the tuba concerto, that piece for harmonica and orchestra for Larry Adler. I mean, all that wonderful film music.
Well, and you take the difference between the Mass in G minor and the five mystical songs and Dona Nobis Pacem.
Of course.
Which, thank God we have that, because without that, I'm sure we would not have had Britain's War Requiem.
Of course. Actually, the C Symphony
Yes.
is a piece that's very dear to my heart because it's the last piece I ever conducted in Gloucester Cathedral.
Oh,
when I was director of music there, it was in the three choirs in 2001. What a fabulous piece with the Philharmonia and great soloists. And actually, Ursula Vaughan Williams came to the concert and we had lunch. She was absolutely hilarious.
Really?
She's one of the funniest people I think I've ever met. I mean, once she started on a roll talking about her relationship with her husband, because they were married only for 5 years, but I mean, it was amazing. He just, Vaughan Williams, he kept creating right to the end of his life, right up till the Ninth Symphony. Some composers like Sibelius, who didn't write anything for the last 30 years of his
Rossini,
life.
I mean, right?
Exactly. But RVW, it was a kind of late flourishing in all respects, and they traveled.
Oh,
they came
amazing.
to this country. He lectured at Princeton and Yale. He came to New York, so that was great. But Ursula, over lunch, absolutely hilarious. A little bit hard of hearing, and had definitely been on the sherry.
Oh, I see. But David, let's talk about the transcription process. You've done so much work in this arena, and you do it so beautifully. How does it get off of the orchestral score and into this by way of you?
Okay. Well, I suppose the most important thing, I mean, the kind of sine qua non is that you love the music. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. And in the history of organ music, if you think about it, it all started with Bach. Bach was really the first major composer to make transcriptions of both his own music and also other composers, notably Vivaldi, of course.
Yes.
So, I mean, in the history of the organ in the last 3 or 4 centuries, transcriptions have always been important, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And also in the Victorian period, I mean, organists used to make complete concerts of orchestral music, usually smaller scale, but I mean, people like W.T. Best and Edwin Lemaire, I mean, people just expected to hear transcriptions. And then in the middle of the 20th century, it went completely out of vogue when everybody became interested in things like Baroque fingering and very contemporary music, you know, Messiaen and even more recent than that. But I think now the pendulum has come more into the middle, and I think as often in the arts and in life generally, often the middle course is the most healthy. So now we've had a lot of experience with thinking about articulation and fingering and note values from all the research that's been done into historic practice. Mm-hmm. But also now people, I think, are being more open-minded in terms of programming. But you're asking about the actual technique. I mean, I start from the orchestral score, and I mean, I listen to the piece, of course, there's several fabulous recordings of Vaughan Williams 5 with the score. And then it's just page by page, measure by measure, bar by bar. You work out what is absolutely essential and what can be left to illusion. Because, I mean, clearly with 2 hands and 2 feet, it's impossible to play what an orchestra of 80 musicians would do. So it's like I mean, the intention is not to make a caricature of the orchestra, because there seems no point in doing that. It's sort of taking the music back to its brass roots, back to its absolute core, and recasting it. And all the time you're imagining the looming figure of Ralph Vaughan Williams standing over your shoulder, thinking, well, what would he do if he was giving me a little bit of advice? So that's the kind of idea. And then actually with this piece, there's a very interesting piano duet arrangement by, I think, a pupil of Vaughan Williams, Michael Mulliner, and that's been recorded for the Vaughan Williams Society. It's very interesting, and it's got a lot of RVW's markings on the score of the piano duet. So I used that and did some cross-referencing. So you end up with the final article, and then I brought it here and started this very long procedure of registration, working out the color scheme. And the great thing about putting a transcription onto Sibelius, onto music software, is that it's a kind of evolving process, so that I'll rehearse here for 3 or 4 hours on a Thursday evening and make notes, and then on Friday morning go back and make changes to make it more ergonomic. And you know, if it's too difficult, it doesn't want to be ungainly or unplayable or anything like that. So it's sort of evolved. I mean, I started this transcription more or less at the time of the beginning of the pandemic in February, and it's been a marvelous project, you know, to have something really creative to do. And I mean, I would just like to say also that having the privilege of coming in here twice a week for 10 hours, it's been an absolute lifeline for me. So thank you very much for enabling that.
Well, the room is blessed to have the rocks absorb this sound. You know, we really believe that the stone is alive here with the sound of music. That's an amazing thing. It's so great to have you here. You know, on the business of transcription, I have 2 questions. One, we were talking about Mahler and Vaughan Williams and idiom. Do you find that certain composers simply lie under your fingers when you come to the keyboard more easily than others? Or once you're doing a major orchestral transcription, is it the same nut to crack?
That's a very interesting point. I mean, as I think I hinted a couple of minutes ago, it's a kind of recasting.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I suppose certain pieces do work better than others, but I think if you've got an imagination, it's possible to recast more or less anything.
Well, and to go a little more deeply into the question of transcription, just when, if you could just talk a little bit about when is an oboe an oboe, and when is it not? You know, the idea to, on the one hand, and you referenced this, to replicate the orchestral sounds on occasion. There must be times when you have to do that. A trumpet call in Mahler, for example. But
Exactly.
other times when the greater musical element is served by some other option.
Things like the beginning of Mahler 5, you wouldn't want to play that on the flute, for instance.
Exactly.
It would not quite work. But I mean, just because it says clarinet solo does not necessarily mean clarinet solo. And I mean, the two instruments that we have here, the Skinner, currently, we can't wait for it to come back, but currently, currently under restoration after our fire. But also, I mean, there's an extraordinary digital organ by Walker Technical Company, where a lot of the sounds of this were sampled on Skinner replicas of orchestral sonorities. So here we have cor anglais, tuba, French horn, and you know, in something like the Vaughan Williams, this is really an absolutely perfect scenario, because you can make I mean, it's not exactly the same as the orchestra, but it has as much sonic breadth in a way, and as much variety and color.
Right. Which is a great thing about the King of Instruments, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, I do hope you've enjoyed this short pre-concert talk, and we look forward to welcoming you in just a few minutes to the concert. Just it's not at all too late to order your ticket. Just $10. Go on to stjohndivine.org. That's St. John Divine, all one word. STJOHN divine.org. And on the home page, just click on the, I think there's a picture of me sitting at the organ of St. James Cathedral, Toronto. And then scroll down to where it says tickets, order one ticket, and you just put in your email and your credit card in the normal way. And I hope very much that you'll enjoy the concert. Thanks for joining us.